The mountains of Havelis were not known for life anymore. The old mining town below had been abandoned decades ago when the last mineral vein dried up. The air was cold, thin and silent. Only the wind moved, sliding across jagged stone like the whisper of something ancient that never truly slept. Evan Hale was not a historian or explorer by trade. He was a maintenance technician from one of the outer colonies, a man who fixed broken machines and made things work again. But curiosity had always been his flaw, and when the locals spoke of a breathing cave that never froze despite the mountain's eternal winter, he had to see it. He climbed alone. The light of his handheld lantern painted the rocky walls gold. His breath fogged the air, and each step crunched against frost-covered stone. The path to the cave had long collapsed, but he squeezed through a narrow crack that opened into a wide, hollow space. The walls shimmered with a faint light that came from no source he could name. It felt wrong, yet welcoming, as if the cave itself wanted him to enter. He took slow steps forward, hearing drops of water echo in the distance. The air grew warmer, though there was no sign of geothermal activity. His boots sank slightly into damp soil that shouldn't have existed in such altitude. When he reached the chamber's center, he stopped. There, embedded in a block of black stone, stood a sword. Its blade was long, straight, and silver gray, though the metal didn't reflect light like steel. It seemed to absorb it instead, pulling in every glow from his lantern until the chamber dimmed. The handle was simple, worn leather, torn and cracked. But what struck him most was the faint mist rising from it. The sword was warm. Evan frowned and crouched near it, his gloved hand hovering close. A pulse came from the blade, steady and deep like a slow heartbeat. He felt it through the air. "This isn't possible," he whispered. The sword had no inscriptions, no runes, no ornament. It looked too plain to be anything special, yet it radiated something heavy, something alive. He looked around the cave for clues, expecting ancient carvings or signs of burial, but there was only smooth stone. It was as if the sword had been placed there by time itself. He felt that strange pull again, a mix of fear and fascination. The rational part of him said to leave it alone. He was just a technician, not an archaeologist. But another part whispered that maybe this discovery would change his life. Maybe this was his chance to find something no one else ever had. He removed his gloves and reached out. The metal was hot to the touch, yet not enough to burn. It felt alive, like touching warm skin. A low hum filled the air, growing louder the longer his hand stayed there. The light from his lantern flickered and the ground trembled slightly. He stepped back, heart pounding, but curiosity won again. He gripped the handle and pulled. The sword slid free with almost no resistance. The moment it left the stone, the cave exhaled a gust of hot air. His lantern blew out. In total darkness, a low, rasping voice filled the chamber. "You shouldn't have touched it," Evan froze. His pulse thudded in his ears. The voice didn't echo, it was inside his head. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a rock. He swung the lantern uselessly, trying to relight it, but his hands shook too much. The sword in his grip pulsed again, and faint red lines began to glow along the blade, like veins coming to life after centuries of stillness. "Who's there?" he shouted. "Show yourself." The voice hissed again, slower this time. 500 years of silence. And a human breaks it. How fitting. Evan's breath quickened. The ground trembled again, dust raining from the ceiling. The air tasted metallic. Somewhere in the dark, something moved. A faint scraping, like stone sliding over stone. He wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to drop the sword and flee, but his hand wouldn't open. It was as if the blade had fused with him, its warmth now burning through his skin. "Let go," he muttered, pulling at his fingers, but they refused to obey. "You can't," said the voice. "You carry its burden now." "Whose burden?" he demanded. "The one who failed." Before he could ask what that meant, a blast of light filled the cave. His vision blurred. When he blinked, the cavern wasn't stone anymore, it was metal. Dark, curved walls hummed with a low vibration, and the ground beneath him was smooth like polished obsidian. He wasn't in the cave. Not exactly. The sword had transported him, or maybe his mind, into another place. A memory, maybe. Figures appeared around him. Ghostly outlines of tall beings, humanoid but too elongated. Their faces were hidden by masks that glowed faintly, and each carried a sword like the one in his hand. They stood in a circle around a central platform where another sword lay, identical except cracked in two. A deep voice, older and heavier than the one in his head, echoed through the metallic chamber. It must never be wielded again. Its will is broken. If touched, it will seek a host and consume them. The vision faded. Evan gasped as he found himself back in the cave, the sword still glowing faintly. The air was thick with dust and energy. He felt the ground pulse beneath him like a heartbeat. "What did you do to me?" he whispered. "I did nothing," said the voice. "You awakened me." The sword's glow intensified. He saw faint runes crawl up the blade, symbols that hadn't been there before. His hand, still unable to let go, began to tremble violently. "Stop!" he shouted. "You freed what should have remained bound," the voice replied. "The chain of time has broken. The world will remember again." A sound like a distant thunder rolled through the cave. The walls cracked, glowing red along the fractures. Evan stumbled as chunks of stone fell from above. He darted toward the exit, the sword still fused to his hand. He squeezed through the narrow crack, emerging into the frozen air outside. Snow swirled in the wind. Behind him, the cave collapsed in a burst of dust and steam. He coughed, stumbling down the slope until he reached the base of the mountain. He tried again to drop the sword, slamming it against a rock, but the blade didn't even scratch. Instead, the ground around it sizzled where it touched, melting the ice. He looked at his reflection on the blade's surface. For a moment, he thought he saw his own face, but the eyes weren't his. They glowed faintly red. Then the voice spoke again, quieter now, as if whispering secrets meant only for him. "There is still time. You can end what began, but you must go where it sleeps." "Where what sleeps?" he asked. "The heart of the fallen. The city beneath the storm." Evan didn't understand. He looked around at the empty mountains, the endless snow, the distant abandoned town below. Whatever the voice meant, it wasn't a riddle he could solve here. He took a deep breath and started down the path toward the valley. The wind howled louder, carrying a low rhythmic hum that matched the pulse of the sword in his hand. Every step felt heavier, as if the mountain itself watched him. He reached his small rover, climbed inside, and started the engine. The dashboard lights flickered, reacting strangely to the sword's glow. His onboard AI gave a soft chime. "Warning," it said. "Unidentified energy source detected. Advise disposal." "I wish I could," he muttered. He drove through the frozen plains, trying to ignore the faint whispers that now filled the air. Sometimes he thought he heard words. Other times it was just static. But one message kept repeating, clearer with each mile. "You touched what cannot die." He didn't sleep that night. The sword stood beside his bedroll in the rover, faintly glowing even when covered. It never cooled down. He thought about burying it in the snow, but part of him was afraid it might melt through to the planet's core. At dawn, he checked his sensors again. A strange energy reading had appeared on the map, far to the east near the ruins of the old mining facility. It pulsed in rhythm with the sword. He didn't know why, but he felt certain that was where he needed to go. As the rover rumbled across the wasteland, he noticed the sky changing color. The pale white clouds had taken on a faint reddish hue. The temperature climbed even though it should have been freezing. By the time he reached the mining valley, the air shimmered like heat waves. The abandoned buildings stood silent, their windows shattered, their metal frames twisted by time. He parked near the entrance of an old shaft and stepped out. The ground trembled again, just once, like a heartbeat. Evan held up the sword. Its light pulsed brighter, casting red reflections across the broken walls. The whispers grew louder. He descended into the mine, following the old tunnels. The deeper he went, the warmer the air became. The hum of the sword turned into a steady rhythm, almost like a voice chanting far below. At the end of the tunnel, he found a sealed door made of black metal. It wasn't part of any human design. He brushed dust from its surface and saw the same glowing symbols that marked the sword's blade. When he held the sword closer, the door responded. It shimmered, then slowly opened, releasing a gust of warm air that smelled like iron and rain. Inside was darkness deeper than any he had seen before. And then the voice returned. "You've brought me home." The sword's glow flared so bright it blinded him. And the last thing he heard before everything went white was a whisper, colder than the mountain wind. "Now the world will remember its sins." Evan woke on the floor, surrounded by a red glow. The air was heavy, filled with a faint hum that seemed to come from deep below the ground. His head pounded, and for a moment he couldn't remember where he was. Then he saw the sword lying beside him, its blade pulsing like a heartbeat. He sat up slowly, realizing the cave he had entered earlier was gone. This place was different, massive, metallic, and alive. The walls curved in strange patterns, breathing faintly as if made of some living alloy. The floor beneath him shimmered like liquid steel, yet held firm under his boots. "Where am I?" he whispered. "You are beneath the mountain," said the voice, deeper now, more human, but still filled with that eerie echo. "The heart of what your kind buried long ago." Evan stared at the glowing blade. "You're the sword, aren't you?" There was a pause before the voice replied. "I am the echo of the one who was bound to it. A memory and a warning." The words didn't make sense, but before he could ask more, he heard footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate. He turned and saw a figure approaching through the red mist. It wasn't human. The figure was tall, almost twice his height, and wrapped in tattered armor that looked fused with its body. Its face was hidden behind a cracked mask with faint lights glowing where eyes should have been. The armor pulsed with the same red energy as the sword. "You've awoken it," the being said in a voice that sounded like distant thunder. After 5 centuries of silence, Evan backed away instinctively. "I didn't mean to, I just touched it." "That was enough," said the being. "You carry its code now. The sword recognizes you, recognizes me. I'm just a technician," Evan said. "I fix machines, not ancient weapons." "Then perhaps that is why it chose you," the being replied. "You are not one of them." "One of who?" "The makers," said the figure. "The ones who built this world, then abandoned it. They sealed this weapon away because it defied them. It remembered too much." Evan stared at the glowing blade, confusion rising. "What do you mean, remembered?" "The sword is not a tool," said the being. "It is a record, a living archive. Every death it witnessed, every betrayal it caused, is written in its metal. When you touched it, you gave it a mind again, yours." Evan felt a chill crawl down his spine. "So it's inside me?" "In a way," the being said. "You are linked. Its memories are now yours to carry. If you do not master it, it will consume you." The sword pulsed again in his grip, and for a second he saw flashes. Cities burning, skies darkened by machines, armies of alien and human forms clashing under crimson light. Then the vision vanished, leaving him breathless. "I saw something," he said. "War?" "The last war," said the being. "The war that ended everything." The ground beneath them trembled. The red glow brightened. Somewhere in the distance, machinery began to stir. The being looked toward the sound. "It's waking," it said grimly. "The forge." "What forge?" Evan asked. "The one that sleeps beneath all things," said the being. "The sword's true source. It must not rise again." The metallic walls began to shift, opening pathways that glowed with red light. The figure stepped toward one of them. "Follow me," it commanded. Evan hesitated, but staying behind felt worse. He followed. The path led them through a vast tunnel lined with strange symbols. Some looked familiar, mathematical shapes, star maps, binary sequences. Others were beyond comprehension. The hum grew louder, vibrating in his bones. Finally, they entered a chamber so large it felt like the inside of a planet. In its center was a pit filled with molten metal. Enormous chains hung from above, dipping into the liquid light. Above the pit hovered a massive structure, a sphere made of interlocking blades. "That," said the being, pointing, "is the forge, the heart of the weapon. 500 years ago, it tried to reshape the world in its own image. We stopped it. We thought sealing the sword would end its hunger. But now you've awakened it again." Evan felt his chest tighten. "So what do I do? How do I stop it?" "You can't," said the being. "Not yet. But you can contain it if you choose." "Choose?" The being looked at him, its mask cracked enough to reveal eyes glowing faintly blue. "The sword responds to will. It feeds on strength, on purpose. You must give it one. If you don't, it will find its own." Evan stepped closer to the pit, staring at the swirling molten light. The whispers returned, thousands of voices overlapping. Some begged, some warned, some laughed. He gripped the sword tighter, trying to block them out. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you still question," said the being. "Those who believe they understand everything are the ones it devours first." The sword pulsed harder, and he felt something like a heartbeat sync with his own. His vision blurred again, showing him fragments, soldiers with glowing armor, ships burning in orbit, a massive being crowned in light shouting words he couldn't understand. Then another vision followed, of silence, centuries long, as the sword lay buried in the cold, waiting. When he came back to himself, the being was watching him. "It's showing you what came before," it said. "Do not let it control you." Evan nodded weakly. "What happens if it does?" The being didn't answer. It only looked toward the forge, which now shook violently. The red, molten light rose higher, forming shapes, arms, wings, a head. The sphere above began to unfold like a blooming flower. "It's merging," said the being. "It senses the sword's return." The floor cracked open, releasing a wave of heat that knocked Evan backward. The sword flew from his hand, spinning through the air, but instead of falling into the pit, it stopped mid-air. The voice inside his head became a scream. "You left me in darkness. You sealed me away. But I endure." The molten light formed into a gigantic shape, a humanoid figure made of liquid metal, its chest glowing with fire. The chains holding it snapped one by one. The being drew its own blade, smaller but glowing blue. "This is what I feared. The forge sentinel has awakened." Evan scrambled to his feet. "What do I do?" "You must claim it fully," the being shouted. "The sword chose you. Command it, or it will command the world." Evan looked at the floating weapon. It pulsed violently, torn between him and the creature below. He reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the hilt, a shock ran through his entire body. The red light poured into him, images flashing faster than he could process. War, death, rebirth, silence. He fell to his knees, shouting in pain. The being tried to reach him, but the force pushed it back. Inside Evan's mind, he stood in darkness again. The voice, louder now, surrounded him. "You think you can wield me? You are nothing, a fragment of what once was." "Maybe," Evan said, panting. "But I'm still here." He focused every thought on one image. Peace. A world without burning skies. A world without endless war. The sword hesitated. "You seek stillness?" it whispered. "After all I've shown you." "Yes," Evan said. "Because someone has to stop the cycle." The darkness around him shattered like glass. When his eyes opened, he was back in the forge chamber. The sword blazed white instead of red. The massive molten figure roared, but its fire dimmed. Evan stood, the energy surrounding him like a storm. The being watched in awe. "You're controlling it," it said. "Not controlling," Evan said softly. "Guiding." He raised the sword and drove it into the ground. The light exploded outward, pure and blinding. The forge screamed, a sound like metal tearing apart, and then fell silent. The molten figure froze mid-motion, turning solid, lifeless. When the light faded, Evan stood alone in a quiet chamber. The sword still glowed faintly, but no longer pulsed. The being lay nearby, half buried in debris. Evan rushed to it. "Hey, are you alive?" The being looked up weakly. "You did it. You sealed it again, but at a cost." "What cost?" "You," the being said. "You are now its keeper. It will never let you go." Evan looked down at the sword. It had cooled completely, the glow fading into a dull silver. He tried to drop it, but just like before, it remained bound to his hand. The being smiled faintly. "Do not fear it. The world is safe again. For now." The walls began to crumble. The ground trembled as if the entire structure was collapsing inward. Evan tried to pull the being up, but it shook its head. "My time ended long ago," it said. "Yours begins now. Go." Evan hesitated, then nodded slowly. He turned and ran through the collapsing tunnels, guided by faint blue lights that flickered along the walls. He emerged into the cold daylight just as the mountain split open behind him, swallowing itself in a massive sinkhole. He fell to his knees in the snow, breathing hard. The mountain was gone. The cave, the forge, everything had vanished. Only the faint hum of the sword remained, vibrating softly like a heartbeat that now matched his own. He looked up at the sky. The red tint was fading, replaced by the pale blue of dawn. The voice whispered one last time, softer now, almost gentle. "You did not destroy me. You merely gave me purpose again." Evan sighed. "Then let's hope that purpose stays quiet." He stood, looking out across the snowy wasteland. Somewhere deep inside, he could still feel the sword's warmth. It wasn't evil. Not anymore. It was simply alive. As he walked toward the horizon, the sun rose behind him, casting long shadows across the frozen plains. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying a faint echo of metal, of memory, of something ancient that refused to die. And far below, where the mountain had collapsed, a single red light flickered once, then went dark.